Hello, friends, our Twitter family, our Facebook followers, and both of you that are using Google+. It is the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up, now called ASP.NET 10. Now, that would be silly. Who would do that? We've got John Galloway. Hi, John Galloway.
Hello, I'm John Galloway 10, actually.
Yes, John Galloway 10, also known as John Galloway X. And we've got Glenn Condron, and we've got Louis D. Jardin. How are you guys?
Good. Fantastic.
And welcome also to our Focusing X up on the whiteboard there.
Yeah.
Very, very exciting times. There's, yes, Windows 20 coming soon. So it is, again, our weekly stand-ups. If you've never seen this before, go up to asp.net/vnext. There's a whole YouTube playlist. You can see all the other stand-ups that we've done. We'll have different guests and different people on. Each week, we will alternate, as we are, between 2 or 3 in the afternoon Pacific and 9 or 10 in the morning Pacific, which allows us to hit most of the waking hours of the folks worldwide. We've got Glenn and Louis here because we've got packing and publishing, which is interesting and new. But we also want to talk about what's the status of Alpha 4, guys.
So we, as Damien said last week, we are rapidly approaching the end of Alpha 4. As those of you who are playing along at home have seen, you have seen that the milestones for the most part are closed out. We're getting pretty close to shipping. It's been a few delays here and there, but it's very, very close to us being ready for an Alpha 4 release.
Okay. And
so in time we're progressing on beta. We started doing some beta stuff, and Damien wanted me to say that tag helpers are also very, very close to hitting main. So for those of you who have been waiting for tag helpers, you should be able to start seeing some of those appearing in our main branches.
So we saw tag helpers on the last week, and we saw kind of a structure of how they were coming together. When you say hitting main, they're in a feature branch right now?
Yeah, so today Taylor does most of his work in a feature branch. If you want to get working, it's a matter of pulling down that feature branch and then spending an hour with Taylor while he sets everything up on your machine to make it work properly, and you pray to the gods. But pretty soon that'll be stable enough to hit main, and then you'll just to be merged into our main branch, and you'll just become part of using the MVC packages at that point.
Cool, very cool. So packing and publishing has been a big question. People are trying to figure out, is this just a matter of just Xcopy and uploading something with FTP, or how many different ways are there going to be to package up and publish an ASP.NET MVC or ASP.NET vNext application?
Okay. So the way that we like to talk about this is there's a step which is not building your application, but as we said, packing and getting ready to take your application to a server. And what we've provided with vNext, for those of you who have tried it out, is there's the KPM command line tool, where you can that is the one that you would use to restore all the packages to your application. It also does anything else to do with packaging for one of the vNext applications. So one of the things you can do is a thing called pack, where we do KPM pack on the command line, and you can give it a path to where you want your application to be packed to. So KPM pack, see output something, and it will pack to that application. And then what you get is a folder structure where it has your application in it. It has all the packages that your application needed, and it's sort of ready for you to Xcopy to your server, as you just said, or for you to zip and send somewhere, or do whatever it is you want to do. And when you do right-click publish inside Visual Studio, and you get that web deploy UI to be able to say, send this to my Azure website or send this to the file system, under the covers, what that's actually doing is calling that KPM pack command line tool and then taking that exact same output that you would generate if you use that command line tool and then sending it to the server for you. So there's one way to pack and send your application, and it's the KPM pack tool, but there might be different UIs that you will layer on top to make it easier or different for you to do it. And there are a few interesting things which I think Lou might try and draw up on the whiteboard. Is when you pack your application, some interesting things happen. So if Lou starts to draw, and maybe draws what it looks like on disk when you packed your application, we're getting some blur happening as we hopefully all refocus. There we go.
All right. So from the command line, you say KPM pack. By default, it'll do what's ever in the current directory. So KPM pack, you can run that from your web application, or you can give it an argument that points to the project where your web application is located. And the switch is out, and then you provide your target folder name there.
Zoom, focus. There we go.
Sorry. Oh, no.
No.
So this gets all of the ducks in a row to xcopy out. The source code can be xcopied itself, but a lot of times it's getting packages from a common location. They're not all sort of like bundled together and grouped together. So that's really what this is doing. It's kind of like grouping everything in a directory structure that is ready to go. The first directory that you'll notice in there is www.root as a top-level directory. And then also approot will come out side by side with that. If you take a look into www.root, you'll find about what you expect in that there'll be a web config. If there is any IIS configuration that's going on, along with all of your static files.
So the intent here would be that IIS, if you're using IIS to host your web application, that www root folder is where IIS would point. It's what it would be serving up to the user. So things inside that folder would be stuff that you could access from the browser, and stuff outside of that folder is stuff that you wouldn't be able to.
So does that mean that what's reflected from a source code perspective is not necessarily what's reflected when you decide to wrap this up? Like when we think about ASP.NET right now, you put a default .aspx in a folder, or you set up some routes, and pretty much what you see in source view is what you see at deployment time. That link has been broken.
Well, yeah, it is. And that link is a little broken. Well, bad way to put it, but that
Not
link...
broken, but it's not the way we're used to it.
Exactly. That link is a little different. Taking a look at the competitive landscape, you can see that a lot of the technology is moving away from the idea of blending your static files and your code together. That made a lot of sense back in the day when an HTTP request came in and the path was actually a code asset, right? If it was a PHP file or if it was an ASPX file, it made sense for your code to actually be the same file system that your static files were in. Now that every web application that you'll see has like friendly URLs or something where like the username becomes part of the path isn't really connected to your code anymore. So that's where a lot of those technologies end up, where there's a routing system, a routing module in advance that says the request comes in, if the path goes to code, that code is not a file on disk, that code is a route. So it goes off to your application in some cases, and the other cases, the only ones that are left are where the static files are being served from disk. So it's a long way of saying, inside this directory, you will find all and only static files. Inside approot, you will find packages directory, X, Y, etc., the packages you're using, and you will also find src, for everything that is a source library, A, B, C. So all of your binaries end up being sort of like Nougat packages expand here. All of your source that you're shipping as like .cs files will go here.
And .cs is the only thing you'd see at this point, right? That's the only supported source type.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, right now.
The critical thing is that there is a project .json present in each of these things, and then this will contain the rest of the rules about how A is used. So when you're using A, B, C, X, Y, this is what you'll see. It's either going to be a source directory, is where this library is coming from, or a package directory, which is where that library is coming from. So everything else is going to be static content. One of the nice things about that is that a lot of times if you're using friendly URLs, you'll bump into things where there are certain keywords or there are certain guards that are in place that stop you from accidentally serving source. There's a lot of things being done behind the scenes to protect you from that happening. And this really is just sort of the ultimate safety because the code is not there. The only thing here is going to be static files, and if it's not there, it won't be served statically. So.
It helps make you a little bit safer by default in terms of what can and can't be browsable, even regardless of the settings of your static file middleware that's serving up static content. It's less important to have adequate white and black lists for what types of files can and can't be served if there's a folder and everything, everything in there can be served. Obviously, those white and black lists still exist, but they become less critical for security.
Is there anything special I would need to know about this from an IIS perspective, like how this is being handled?
You need to point your you need to this. This is like where your virtual app would point to, the www root. As far as I'm concerned, this is your website, and then there is the Helios or the native module that we would be installed in, that we're working on getting an installer for now. So you would have an option in your app pool in IIS to be able to select, vNext and point it at this, and then put your application to this inside that app pool, and then everything will work because that module knows how to look out of that root when it's important for and things like that. And in the case of Helios, you would have, in the case of if you're using Helios and not using that bin, that native module, there'll be a bin folder in here as well that has like a little loader in it, inside the www root, that just knows how to boot the rest of your application.
So when I'm making a WinForms application, like Hello World, I know the folder I can delete is bin and debug and release. Anything, just hit bin. Like that's my clean operation. Is anything inside of those roots source that should never be deleted? Like, is there a clean way to say torch it and build again? Or rather, torch it and repack?
Oh yeah, when you pack, this output parameter points to this folder right here.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the folder that you destroy.
So that whole folder can always go away?
Yeah. It can always be regenerated from your source.
www root can, app root can't.
No, these are two output folders. So if you say output goes here, like if we say go output to demo, right? It'll create the demo directory. If you look inside demo, you'll see www and app root.
Okay, so demo is what? Demo's like out. Demo's the name of the folder I decided to pick. Like, is it default to project name?
No, just you provide one.
Mm-hmm. Yep, you provide one.
There is no default. I think there's some defaults inside Visual Studio because it like outpacks to a temporary location or to a location you give it. But the tooling itself doesn't provide you a default. It just gives you actually, I think the default is just a folder called output inside the bin or something.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that from my perspective, I would like to have a default. Like bin is understandable, output is understandable. So if by default output was the case and I just know I can torch output, and if I don't like output, I give it an override, that makes sense to me.
Yeah,
certainly, and we can figure out what those defaults would be that would work in most solutions. Like if you just ran KPM pack in a solution, how would it know how far back to know that it's looking at the root of the solution in source control? Mm-hmm. Be having like artifacts or something like that as the like canonical. Here, you just put your output here if you don't say anything.
Yeah. So there's a couple of other things that happen that are interesting here that we haven't really talked about. We talked about packages, this packages folder here, right, that contains all of the packages that your application depends upon. The reason that that's a little bit more interesting than what you may think is that when developing a vNext application in Visual Studio, you depend upon your packages, the packages you depend upon. They don't live necessarily with your application when you're working on it on your dev machine. By default, all of our tooling will put packages into your user profile, not specific to an application. So if you have 5 applications on your machine and they're all using the same version of MVC, the MVC packages are only going to be on disk once, and all of them will be sharing in that location for it. Mm-hmm. So, and then in the case of packing, it's going to go out to your user profile. It's going to grab all those versions of the packages that it needs and put them inside this packages folder. So that's another difference between your like dev image when the way that the thing looks on disk and in source control when you're developing versus the way it looks after you've packed it when it's ready to go to a server.
So one of the things that's the most attractive, if not the #1 feature of vNext, is this idea that it's all self-contained, right? It's that promise of here's the folder and I can put it on any machine without a big system-wide install. You just described a scenario where we do a pack and we pull stuff from different user profile folders and things like that. Is it possible that I could build the same app from the same source on Glenn's machine and Lewis's machine and get the different resulting output?
Not unless the same version, not unless there's a package that has the same version and the same ID, but it has different things on it on 2 different machines. So, which typically, if you're using actual Nougat packages, is not going to be the case.
Okay. So if you're using Nougat in the standard way, kind of like falling into the pit of success, you're not going to accidentally have a situation where you're requesting JSON.NET version 4.5 or up.
Yeah.
Glenn has 4.5, Lewis has 4.6, and you end up with different outputs. Are the builds deterministic and reliable?
If the builds are deterministic and reliable, you'll get the same like name and versions of packages here. The only thing that would make it different is if Glenn was pointing at a different MyGit feed.
Which had the same package IDs on it. But
I see. So if you had them pointing like totally different sources from where they pull their packages, one's the enterprise one and one's a MyGet or one's public, but for the most part, everything that you need to make a deterministic build is described in your app root.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't a dumb question, was it?
That was a dumb question. So there is one case that's slightly different to that. That's what we just described was the Scott likes to pretend to ask dumb questions occasionally.
No, I legitimately was worried that was a totally dumb question.
So one of the things that you can do that's somewhat interesting, which for those of you who have been looking at some of our samples or showing apps that we build, we often put a star inside of our project.json files.
Sure.
And those, yeah. And then the project.json file is where you have your list of these are the packages that I depend upon. And one of the things we can do is actually put like a little star in the build number part of that. So when we're working internally, we have, every day, maybe multiple times a day, there's a new version of the MVC framework, right? And it's called, MVC alpha 4 dash some build number. So one feature that the project.json does have is the ability to put like a star in that build number bit. And that just means get me the highest, whatever the highest build number is. Mm-hmm. So if you decide to do something similar to like what we do with the stars inside your build number part of your thing, then in that world, you could pull a different package to me because we're just saying get me whatever the latest one was, and there could be a new latest one. In reality, for your applications that you're actually building yourself, you wouldn't be doing this. You'd be depending upon RTN, like released versions of a package, and you'd have just 1.0 in here, and it would always be 1.0 of that package. And regardless of where you got 1.0, as long as that package, the 1.0 of that package everywhere is the same.
Okay. Cool. So theoretically, someone could do a build, and then 20 minutes later, another package is released to the same public location and do another build, and it's different, but that doesn't change the fact that everything that was described was, it ran as it was expected to run.
Yeah, and there's one case really this is optimized for, which is if you are getting your own packages off of a CI server.
Basically, that's the time where it's useful.
Mm-hmm.
Which we do all the time. You might do it for your internal packages, for your internal MyGet feed. And this is super nice for that whilst you're doing dev work. But once you're done, you'll probably change it.
So then that's arguably no different than any build system that we do today.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when you're relying on packages for everything everywhere else, right? Your package restore.
We added this from a lot of internal experience where we were doing multi-solution development, and there was always that constant like updating to the latest, number off the build server so that the solutions that used a package from another solution were getting something reasonably current. And this just goes to the edge of what's being last cranked off the presses.
Yeah. So to go back to something that Scott said earlier, which was we talked about being able to pack your application and you can copy that folder anywhere and run it anywhere. One of the options when doing KPM pack, one of the additional options, if you just write KPM pack in the command line and look at its options, one of them is to say which version of the KRE, let it get focus again, which version of the KRE you're going to include in that thing that you pack. It'll be the one that you're running against. So one of the things you can do there is say include the core CLR and the KRE. If I'm not sure I haven't looked at all of the community stand-ups, so I'm not sure how much we've talked about, but the KRE is like our runtime, the thing that sits underneath and hosts all of our projects and everything. So the core CLR specific version of that, so that it has the core CLR with it. If you say use if you say pack with one of those, it'll put the CLR inside that packages folder of your packed image, which is that's why the whole thing is self-contained, because it has the CLR.
So by default, it doesn't do that?
By default, I think right now it assumes, correct me if I'm wrong, Lou, it assumes that the CLR and the KRE are already going to be on the machine somewhere, not in your application. So you provide an extra option to say make it self-contained. Because most of the time you probably share that, I think is our assumption.
Yeah, and if you do a publish from Visual Studio, I believe that they're providing the right argument.
The right argument, yeah.
So if you do a publish or a pack from Visual Studio, I believe that either it's an option or they just default it to giving you the right one.
I think they may even give you more. I think they may even give you like Core CLR and desktop or something, just in case. Something like that.
So this is an interesting little bit of nuance here we should talk about. So in today, DesktopCLR, I install a 250 meg thing. I may or may not reboot, and it's somewhere deep inside of Windows / somewhere I shouldn't be.
Yeah.
In the future, you can kind of move the slider bar a little bit over and say, I can install 4 or 5 different versions of the CLR, in this case the Core CLR, and they're going to be in my user profile folders?
Well, probably not on a server where you don't have user profiles, but on your dev machine, certainly they'll be in your user profile. On the server, on the server, there's an equivalent where there's like an environment variable that points to some path on the machine, and you can put them there, and then the applications will share. So
then, on the server today, I have one desktop CLR. I have 100 applications running on this server. I patch the desktop CLR. Oops, it breaks 70 of the 100 applications. That's what's bad. In the future, I have 3 or 4 versions of the Core CLR on that server. I patch one of them, and I'm aware of it. And in worst case scenario, I break 1 or 2 apps that use that specific one. And if that becomes a problem, I go, oh, well, this bug fix broke that. Then I just bin deploy the CLR with the app and pin it to a specific version, and then I have broken nothing.
Yep, that's the idea.
Yeah, and two things help accomplish that. This zip file itself has the CLR in it, so it's not installed centrally. It's installed inside that directory for the Core CLR. So it's bringing your own CLR literally. Yeah, and when you do a pack with that runtime switch, like Glenn was saying, there's the output directory, there's app, root, and then packages.
Yeah.
And if you provide that runtime switch where it's bring your own KRE, that's where it ends up going.
Yeah. So your scenario of now it's broken, I might just make the CLR local for this app to fix it. You would move it into the packages folder here, and then it would work, or you'd be able to run from there instead of globally.
So where all am I going to use KPM pack for? I mean, obviously as a build deploy step.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? Is it something where you would assume people would use this for, maybe packaging up for archival or other things?
Maybe. I mean, anywhere where you want to take it's generating a runnable image, say, of my website, right? Okay. So anywhere where you're going to say, okay, here's my site. I want to take it as it's going to sit when it's running on a server and put it somewhere. You would run pack to do that step.
And how about?
Huh?
Go ahead.
No, go finish your question.
Well, is it also just part of every time I hit F5 in Visual Studio, it does pack and then run?
It is not that. Okay. So often when I do talks on vNext, this is where this comes. How we lead into this is when you build in Visual Studio, what are you trying to achieve? And I think Scott talked about it when he was a tech ed as spell check for developers. Right? It's like when you press F5 in. So this is something else we should talk about. Yes. So when you press F5 in Visual Studio to actually run your application, it doesn't pack. It just runs it from the way it looks in source control. So we can actually run from both formats. But the packed one is better from a deploying to a server, production, runtime kind of standpoint.
And not everyone wants to put their source code on the server somewhere, right?
Exactly. And so one option we didn't talk about is when you do KPM pack, one of the options you'll have will be able to say, pack my application and don't have it. We showed an example where there were still source files inside the packed output. It doesn't have to be the case. There will be the option to turn them all into DLLs. And what's actually interesting there is when that happens, I believe, that we actually generate a package for your application. So the code, that SRC file that we showed you, that's not there. All that code is compiled, and there's a packages inside the packages folder. There's a package for your application, which is interesting.
We've only got a couple more minutes left in this one, but a reminder to all of us that we'll make sure to do a more detailed community stand-up on just what Glenn said, that spell check. You were going to say something, John?
Well, yeah. Will I run into places maybe where I'll get a different, something different happening in Visual Studio versus when I do KPM pack and run? You know what I mean? Should I be worried about that?
It should be remarkably similar. Like when you're in your development environment, you're usually enlisted in source control, like a source directory and then your application, and then you'll have project JSON and your various source files. Inside here, you should expect also to see if there's a dev root folder here. This is where you'll put your static content. So for development time, If you are using something like static file transformation, like a gulp or one of those, this would be sort of like your output location. If you're not, then this is simply where you put your static files. So when you press F5, in your Visual Studio experience will be pretty much exactly what's happening in production. IIS is pointing here, and then here is just where your app source is. So if you ship source, it'll sort of like compile this on the server as it needs it, just like it would. Same thing. The same code in the development experience is running on the server. So if your library is source, this will turn into a DLL in memory on the server. And like Glenn was saying, if you pack with a no source switch, what that means is instead of this ending up in your source directory, in the packed image, it'll end up in your packages directory. So the code behind turns into a Nougat package for the purpose of deploying.
Yeah. So what he's kind of saying is that the code, it's the same, it's just that the folders are inside the different places when you're packed or when you're not packed, that's all.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you're not going to be, are you going to be debugging while you're packed?
Probably not, but maybe if you've deployed source, I guess you could.
Oh yeah, you certainly could. And we got that Monaco. That's a
Monaco, yeah.
You know how you can use Azure websites and get at the source code and start editing it?
Mm.
If you pack and you end up with these like source directories, you can actually just go to Monaco, point at those files, and start editing your code.
Monaco is the Visual Studio Online, JavaScript, tiny VS that you could do that. So that's a great point.
Yeah, we announced it not long ago, and I've done a little bit of work here and there to. You can actually get all of our VNext stuff running on there, so that you can even do like switching between versions of Core CLR and all sorts of craziness on there. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, but it is kind of neat to see it's got that same sort of usage profile that other languages have. So if you've got a bug in your controller, or if you want to put in like a try catch null because you didn't think of that and you need to hotfix your server, you can do that right in the file and just refresh and it'll pick that change up and keep running.
Assuming you want, of course.
If you want to.
All about choices. We're all about choices here.
Well, it appears to be it's about choices. It's about modularity, right?
That's fundamentally, yeah.
Cool. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. Again, you can get to all of these recordings and others at asp.net/vnext. And the next one is going to be next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific. We'll have. We didn't get a lot of time for questions here, but we are going to try to come up with a good way to get feedback while doing this live, and then also staying within the time limits and stuff like that. And of course, we'll be watching both the YouTube comments, Twitter comments, and stuff like that. So do keep the questions coming, even if you happen to be watching this not live. Thanks, everybody.
Me or Lou or anybody, and we'll talk more.
Very cool.
See you guys.